Hey all, it's JP. I just wanted to make a quick video going over how to configure the collections in Postman for both the Jamf Pro and the Classic APIs. So why is this useful? It gives a centralized place where you can see all the different API endpoints for Jamf Pro, and gives you sample code for interacting with them, as well as sample responses, so you can see what type of response to expect from certain API endpoints. So it's super helpful in that sense, and it makes things a lot easier when you're testing things. So I highly recommend setting this up if you do have the time. All the documentation for this is on the developer.jamf.com website. This page provides an overview of the Jamf Pro and Classic API client credentials authorization, and it gives you more links to documentation on how to create API roles and what's the word I'm looking for API roles and clients within Jamf Pro. There is actually a way to programmatically create these roles and clients via the APIs, the Jamf Pro API, but I'm not sure that we'll go over that in this video. But if you do go to this page here and scroll down, you'll see that there are these Postman collections. So this is where you want to go to import the collections. And of course, you'll want to have the Postman app installed on your computer, which I have over here on the right. And you can see I did delete the previous collections and environment that I had set up, just so that I could kind of create this from scratch. But there's probably some things that I missed, or things that I might have had to set up initially that I'm not going to have to do in this video. So if you're starting completely from scratch, there might be some additional stuff that I've missed. But hopefully this gets you most of the way there, and I don't think it would be too complicated. I do think that you need to create an account, a Postman account, and potentially create a new workspace. I'm not 100% sure about that. I think maybe your workspace just gets created automatically when you first sign in, but those are things that you might have to do ahead of time as well. Other prerequisites for this will be creating the API role and an API client within your Jamf Pro server. So these are things that are sort of out of scope for this video. There is documentation on how to do that within this document here, this page. And if you need help with that, let me know. I'd be happy to help you run through that. Other things I wanted to go over, make sure you're testing these with your Jamf Pro development server or test server. Don't test these API calls in production. It might be helpful to create a separate environment and separate collections for your production server if you want to eventually use these collections for making changes. But for the purpose of this video, this is more of a way to just test API calls, get examples, and see how to interact with certain endpoints without having to pull up documentation all the time and test it one by one. You can kind of just have a centralized place where all the endpoints are listed out and it gives you examples. And like I said earlier, this is the latest version of Jamf is 11.0. It was released 2 days ago. This is just a brief introduction, kind of assuming that you know at least a little bit about the Jamf APIs and how to interact with them. We touched briefly upon client credentials. You do need client credentials to interact with both the APIs, since basic auth was deprecated, I think in version 10.49. Um, and again, the client credentials and client secret, they don't access directly with the API. What you do is you use them to obtain an access token, and then that access token is used to interact with the API. So we'll go over that a little bit more in the video, but let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so as mentioned before, and as it says here, to use either of these Postman collections, you will need to create an environment and specify environment variables as described in the charts below. The collections are designed to function only with the use of environment variables. Variables defined at the collection level are not supported. So they provide more information, more documentation about environments here, but it is pretty self-explanatory. These names and descriptions here are variables that we'll input into our environment, and they look almost the same. The only difference is the classic API URL variable is slightly different. So the name is different, base URL versus URL. And then the classic one excludes the base path. So we'll have to take that into consideration when we set up our environment. And yeah, let's go ahead and move over to the Postman application, and we'll start setting up that environment. So within Postman, within your Postman workspace, you want to go to the Environment tab. You can see here you don't have any environments. So what you want to do is you want to click Create Environment here on the left side, and we'll name this environment Jamf Pro. And then here what we want to do is we want to take all of these different variables, and I'll just add them here one by one. There might be a better way to import this environment, but not that I know of. So for this, we'll just do it this way. You can select secret if you want to obfuscate the value that's saved here. So for this, I'm actually going to change them all to secret, just because I don't want to show my anything here. For your case, it's up to you. I would recommend at least hiding the secret, but I guess it's totally up to you if you're gonna just be using this locally. But either way, I would recommend just hiding it so you don't have the risk of exposing it accidentally. Okay, so for here, we'll leave this. I'm pretty sure we can actually, these will be the same, the client secret and the client ID will be the same between both collections. I believe we can also just specify the value for URL here without, with the different variable name for the classic API, and I believe it will be able to reference both. But we'll find that out in a little bit here. So the next thing you'll want to do is you'll want to put the your URL for your Jamf Pro server, the API URL. So for the Jamf Pro API, it's going to be like this. You'll have your server name .jamfcloud.com with the /API at the end. And for the classic URL, it's going to be just your Jamf Pro URL. So whatever your server name is, .jamfcloud.com. So I'm going to go ahead and fill that out here for myself, and then we'll cut back in a second here. So next thing we want to do here is we want to go and create client credentials if we haven't already. So within your Jamf Pro server, if you go to settings and just search API, you'll see this option for API roles and clients. So let's go here. You'll have to create a API role with assigned privileges. The privileges that you give this API role depends on what you are going to use the API client for. So in our case, what I did was I created a role that has every privilege already. I did this using the Jamf API just because to add privileges to a role is actually quite cumbersome from the graphical interface here. So just to show you what I mean, we'll create a test role, and then you need to manually select each individual privilege that you want to assign to the role, and there's a ton of privileges. So again, it is important to make sure that you limit which privileges you give an API role and client, just in the interest of, least privilege. From a security standpoint, obviously much more secure. In this case, we're testing on a development server. There's nothing in the server that's really, helpful to anyone if they were to, get a hold of those credentials. So it's, from a testing perspective, it's not really a risk to grant all the roles, but I would definitely just be careful when you're doing that. You want to make sure that you limit the privileges that you give any one role and client. There is documentation that shows which roles are needed for each endpoint that you want to interact with. I forget where exactly that is. It might be on the Swagger schema for each API, but I will check that, and I'll try to show it here if I can. Okay, so once you have a API role created, in our case, we have one with access to everything, which again, don't do that in production, but this is just for testing so that we can get a look at all the different endpoints that are available to us. And again, I have this Postman testing client. So to create a client, same thing, you just, click the plus, add a display name, and then you want to select the role that you are going to give to that client. So in our case, I did the all privileges role so that, we can use it for testing. I would just leave the access token lifetime at default. And then you want to click here to enable the API client. Once you click save here, you will have an option to generate a client secret. So you have your client ID here, and then you click here to generate the client secret. It tells you that this cannot be undone. If you click create secret, it tells you it's not going to be revealed again, so make sure you save it somewhere safe. And then it tells you that the client credentials can be redeemed for an access token, as mentioned earlier, at the Jamf Pro API OAuth token endpoint as query parameters. So the endpoint it gives for the OAuth is /API/OAuth/token. This will be included, I believe, in the Postman collection, so it will handle the authentication automatically. But this is good to know for other purposes when you're creating programs to interact with the API. And again, all of this is listed in the Jamf Pro documentation. So here you can choose to copy the client credentials to clipboard. I recommend saving it somewhere safe, as mentioned up here. And then what you're going to want to do as well is copy these values for the client ID and the client secret. and then copy them directly into Postman for your own use. So here, paste the client secret, and grab the client ID as well. And these will be saved in your Postman environment. Go ahead and click Save Environment here. And then we can close out of here. And then also you have an option to rotate the client secret. So if you lose the credentials or just for security reasons want to rotate the secret, you click here to rotate it and it will generate new client credentials for you. Okay, so we'll go back to this client credentials page on the guide here, and we'll click Run in Postman. And then if you're signed in or if you have Postman already, it will just give you this option to import or fork the collection. We're just gonna click fork collection because that will allow us to watch the main the original collection, and it will notify us if anything changes. So here it will prompt you to sign in if you're not signed in already. But what we want to do is just click fork collection. And now, as you can see in our Postman app here, and as well as in the web client here, that you now have a new collection called Jamf Pro API, and it will show that it's your account's fork. So before we dive into that, let's actually just go back here. Oh, won't let us go back anymore. We'll just go ahead and open that client credentials page up again. And we'll go ahead and grab this other collection for the classic API. So again, there's two buttons, this one here and this one right here. So we'll click Run in Postman again, and we'll do the same thing here. We'll click Fork Collection. And we will click Fork Collection again. And then we should see that classic API show up in our Postman app as well. Okay, so here it actually gives you a little bit more information about the collection and how it works. So as you can see, all GET requests should include an example response. All POST requests should include a pre-populated request body. So this is very helpful when you need to see how the request body that you send, how it needs to be formatted and what that can look like. And it also says some endpoints may include more than one example of request and response. So some endpoints have multiple options, and it should include examples for each of those. So far what we've done is we've created a Jamf Pro environment. We've added our client ID, client secret, and both a base URL for the Jamf Pro API and a URL variable for the classic API. And then we've imported the two Postman collections from the Jamf Pro documentation. We forked them, and now we get presented with all these different options. So these are all the endpoints for the classic API. So if we just click into one of these, we'll click into buildings, the buildings endpoint here. So as you can see, it's just going to give you a short description of what the endpoint is. If you click on the first option here for finding all buildings, it will give you an example. So this is the response that you receive if you run a GET request for buildings. So it'll give you the building ID, the name, and it'll do that for each one. So another thing here is a put request for updating an existing building by ID. So it gives you that example here. And you also have a post request for creating a new building. It gives you the example body that you'd pass in. In this case, I guess you're just including the name. So pretty simple here, but this is an example of what you would pass in through a post request to the building endpoint. And you see here, the body is written in XML, and that is because the classic API, which we're looking at, only supports XML. Other options, we'll just go over a delete call here. So again, this is how to delete a building by ID. And then one thing we haven't gone over yet is the authorization tab. So as you can see, the type of authorization defaults to an inherit auth from parent. This will take the authorization method that's inherent within the collection, or I'm sorry, within the environment that we assign to this collection. So you should just leave that the same, and it will relay to the environment that we set, and it should use the authorization from there. So to set up the connection between these two collections and the environment that we created earlier, you want to go to the top right corner here, and there is a drop-down menu for environment. If you click that and just manually set to Jamf Pro, which is the environment we created earlier, that will now refer to the Jamf Pro environment when doing things like authorization. Okay, so now that we have set up the environment, set up the two collections, and tied them to our environment up here, what we can do is we can go back to, let's say, this GET request for finding all buildings, and we can just click send here, and it will send the request to our Jamf Pro server. And then you can see what's returned here is all the buildings that I have created in my test server. And then if we want to test a post request, we can go up to the post request to create a new building. I just left the body here the same as the default example, which was to create a building named Empire State Building. I clicked send here, and the result it returns is the ID for that newly created building. So as you can see here, it's an ID of 4. And just to see if that was successfully created, we can go back to the GET request for finding all buildings and click send. And as you can see here, the size of the building count is now 4. And building with the ID of 4, Empire State Building, is now included in the response from that GET request. Okay, so now we can test the GET request for building by ID. So if we go here, you can see that it's passing in a value parameter. In this case, it's ID, which is unresolved because we haven't defined it yet. But in the example, you can see it passes in a value of 1, and it gets back the building with ID of 1. So for us, we can just change this here to 4 and then send that request, and we should get a response back with the Empire State Building with ID of 4, which we did. just because we'll go ahead and test the delete as well. So I'll go ahead and change that ID to 4. So we'll delete that building with the ID of 4. And you'll get the XML response with just the ID 4. And just to make sure that that was deleted, I'm going to go back here and run this same GET request for all buildings. And as you can see, the size of the buildings is now 3, and there is no building with an ID of 4. So this is the short of how the Postman collection works. It is super useful for interacting with the API, both the classic API and the Jamf Pro API. It's also nice just to have this kind of view of everything, all the different endpoints that are included. A lot of times you don't know what the endpoints are unless you're constantly referencing the documentation. So just being able to open up Postman and see everything that's included, and then immediately being able to interact with them for your own server is super, super useful. And then just to show you that this does work the same way for the Jamf Pro API collection, I just went in here to the Jamf Pro API v2 endpoint for computer pre-stages, and we're just going to run a GET request to get all the sorted and paged computer pre-stages. So if we send that request here, you'll see that I get back a response with the pre-stages that we have set up here. All right, that's the end of the video. I hope this was useful for somebody. Go ahead and leave a comment down below if you have any questions or any ideas for future videos. All right, thank you.